So, how do you handle it when friends and family trash your airline? Buckle up. That's what we're covering in today's Pilot Wife podcast. Welcome to the Pilot Wife podcast. I'm your co captain, Jackie Elmer. I've been a pilot wife for over 3 decades, and I cannot imagine any other lifestyle. Yes, there's no doubt it's a mix of turbulence and blue skies, but what life isn't? I'm here to bring you the best that the aviation life has to offer. And if you want the Pilot Wife survival guide and checklist, go to pilotwifechecklist.com. Now, stow your baggage, strap in, and let's unpack the Pilot Wife life. Okay, I'm Jackie Elmer, and welcome to today's show. And you might assume this, but I recently re-experienced this for the first time in a little while, actually the second time with the same offender over the same issue. And it really got me thinking as I was sitting there for the second time listening, this would be a great episode for the podcast. So you probably know what I'm talking about. Maybe you're sitting around, you're out with a group, or it's the holidays or whatever, and somebody who's flown your airline recently starts complaining about something that they experienced. Can I get a witness? Do you know what I mean? Yes, most of us have been there. So I recently had this over the summer. Actually, let me backtrack and say years ago, the first time I experienced this was, probably 25 years ago at a block party. And the interesting thing was I had stopped working for the airlines at that point myself and was raising my children, married to my airline pilot husband, with a good friend of ours who worked for the same airline, all in a cul-de-sac. And we're sitting around a block party, and one of my neighbors just literally, which by the way, she was notorious for this, a constant complainer just about everything. And let me just say it, I've learned I have to check my own ego and my tendency to push back and get very resentful when people act that way. But she literally just ripped our airline up one side and down the other in front of a whole group of people. And I understand valid complaints. I understand airlines mess up, baggage gets lost, flights get delayed, things get canceled, flight attendants are rude, gate agents are rude. All of that stuff happens to all of us all of the time, right? Or not all of the time, but some of the time. And we experience that in every aspect of life. Now, personally, for me, I try to go out of my way not to be conflictive. Is that a word? Conflictive, or create conflict with other people, especially around me. The last thing I want to do is create conflict with somebody or make them feel defensive or feel small or feel like they should in some way apologize for something that they have nothing to do with. And it was kind of funny because over time, the three of us, myself, my husband, and my neighbor, just kind of handled it in stride. We just let it roll off of us. And this was, back in the 90s. I'm going to say the late 90s, early 2000s. And, we didn't have social media. We didn't really have the internet, not like we do today. And so there wasn't a lot of that type thing. But I remember that always stuck with me because I resented it. I felt like she was just trying to shame us or make us be small to build herself up, which was highly likely. And I always find that's my belief a lot of times when people have to come at you over something, and especially something that you don't control, that's often what's happening. But recently, this was probably a couple of months ago in a totally different neighborhood, way in far north Scottsdale now. We were sitting around at dinner at a friend's, and there were probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 other couples there, and alcohol was flowing as it does. And interestingly, I was not drinking. I've cut way back on my drinking, as some of you know, but I was not drinking that night for sure. And it's interesting how in that situation, very often loose lips start going and people begin to show up and say things in a way that they wouldn't normally. perhaps in any sober situation, we'll call it that. But she started sharing a trip that they had gone on. Now it was a trip that had happened after a loss that their family had experienced. So there was some sadness and grief leaving on the trip. The trip was already planned, but it was one of those situations where there was the departing city was fine, Phoenix. The connecting city, Dallas, was not fine. So there were delays getting into Dallas. And our airline, just so you know, is American. So I know not everybody's American who listens to this, but just interject your airline for it. And then, so not only was Dallas weather conflicted, well, I keep using the word conflicted, it was challenged, but also um, the weather into that city was. So they ended up being rerouted. I think it was a small town that they were connecting to, and it was going to require like a double connection anyway. And they ended up getting rerouted up to Philadelphia, which I know sounds crazy, but if you've worked in the airline industry or you are part of aviation, you understand that's how it goes sometimes. The agents are doing the best they can to get you there as efficiently and all of that. Because believe me, having worked gates before myself, I know that you want to get rid of the problem, so to speak, as quickly as you can. And what I mean that in the kindest way. Just say, help the person get on their way and do what they need and have a good experience and arrive, right? And move them along because you don't know what's going to await for you in the next 2 hours with other flights, etc. So, it ended up being a situation where they were forced to spend the night in Philadelphia, and then it delayed them. So they were like almost an entire day delayed getting to their final destination. And then the weather was crappy where they were going, which was a tropical location. And, just a lot of things piled on that. And then the return flight home ended up being basically the same. I don't know if it was a weather delay. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was a 3-hour delay out of their city. So everything got rearranged. Their flights back into Phoenix got rearranged, et cetera. And it was one of those cases where it's a small town. And if you've ever flown out of a small airport, you know what I'm talking about, where there's often just one boarding area and there might be 2, 3, 4 other regional airplane size, but other people using that gate. And so the gate got absolutely packed with everybody putting their passengers through security. Now, I don't know that all the flights were delayed. I didn't ask a lot of questions. I don't know anything about that. But the conversation just really went from one extreme to the next. It was like, it was almost like it was American Airlines' fault that TSA allowed all the passengers to come into the boarding area, and there was no seats in the restaurant area in that boarding area. I mean, it just went on and on and on. And then when they finally landed in Dallas, there was at least one other couple that was connecting onto Phoenix, whatever it was, and they were running to make their flight because even though they had been rebooked, it was already super close, etc. And when they got off the airplane, they asked the gate agent to call ahead to the gate and just let them know they were on their way. Well, if you've worked in the airline industry, you know that first of all, a gate agent at any gate has the ability to pull up and see, who are my connecting passengers? Is their flight here? Has it landed? Like, what are the odds, right? I mean, there are checks and balances. Anyway, I'm listening to all this and I'm just thinking to myself, keep your mouth shut. Just keep your mouth shut. Just keep your mouth shut. You don't have to win this argument. You don't have to win this argument. You don't have to win this argument. You don't have to be right. You're never going to change their mind. Just make yourself happy, keep smiling and move on. And so when it was all said and done, and it was so funny because she said, I think I may have told you this story before. I'm not sure. And I was like, yes, you have, hoping that would end the conversation, but it didn't. So she kept going. She kept going. I didn't want to interrupt her. I was just thinking to myself, let her vent and get it out, whatever. And then finally she looked at my husband, the pilot, and said, what are your thoughts on that? And he was like, well, I mean, I don't know. We don't, I mean, ultimately, we do have some control over when the airplane actually leaves. We can make decisions, whatever. But a lot of those type decisions are made at the management level, not inside the cockpit. And it's not my place to do all of that. Now, if I know ahead, like if the gate agent comes down and says, look, can you delay for 6 passengers or whatever, whatever. And then he looked at me and he goes, but you've worked a lot of the different aspects in the airline industry. What are your thoughts on it? And I thought, oh my God, I'm so glad he asked me that because of course I'm going to weigh in. That's the benefit of having worked the gates, the ticket counter, been a flight attendant, worked in crew scheduling, worked in dispatch, done all the different things where I've learned, not that I'm an expert, I've been out of it for a long time, but workflows, and there are certain things that don't change. Maybe the processes and the systems that you use change a little bit, but for the most part, you've got rules, you've got regulations, you've got stuff that you have to adhere to, and a lot of that doesn't change a whole lot. So I thought to myself, oh, how would I handle that? And I just looked at her and I was really nice. I was putting my best, but I put my smile on and I said, well, let me ask you a question. How do you know that the entire flight wouldn't have canceled if one crew member was going to time out within 10 minutes if they didn't push, if they didn't close the door and push back? And that's all I said. And I just paused. And she went, and even my husband said, oh, yeah, exactly. Like that stuff happens, right? You're right. That's great. Those are a lot of things that people don't think about. But it was so great because first of all, it made me feel smart. And it made me feel vindicated because it's like, what is she going to say to that? Like nothing. She doesn't have a clue how the inner workings of the airline industry is. But she paused for a minute and she goes, yeah, you might be right. Like that's literally something that I never gave any consideration to. So my whole point in this conversation and sharing this is, as a spouse or a family member or even an employee in the airline situation, when your family and friends and people start trash talking your airline, first of all, check your ego. That's hard to do. Check your desire to immediately want to push back and tell them why they're wrong and everything else. Listen, be empathetic, but then have some key things that you can come back with. And some of mine are, how do you know the crew wasn't going to time out? How do you know and especially like, for instance, flying into Phoenix, which is another connecting city for American, how do you know that delaying that flight for 2 people, I'm just putting a number out there, wasn't going to cause 10 people to misconnect in Phoenix? So there's just so many things that go into it. So what I try to do is educate people in a kind way without being a told you so kind of person. I try to educate them to remove their own angst and irritability and frustration with it. I'm not saying don't be frustrated. I understand that. I'm frustrated too. Even when I'm non-revving, right? Even when I'm flying for free, I get frustrated. But what I've learned to do is try to realize that I don't understand all of the pieces that are going into the decision making. So that's kind of how I try to handle it. And then sometimes I'll just ask questions and say, how do you feel like the airline could have handled it better? How do you feel like the airline could have handled it better for you? And then I'll ask, have you contacted customer service? Because I can't do anything for you, right? But if you contact customer service, possibly they can remedy the situation for you. And then the third one that I really like to always end with is, how can I make this better for you? How can I make this better for you? Again, I say it with a smile. I say it in a kind, compassionate way. But my whole point ideally is, shut up. Stop making this my problem at a party around a whole bunch of other people. Because I always feel like there's a little bit of an ulterior motive behind that. So I would love to hear from you what your thoughts are on this. Let me know your comments. You can always email me through pilotwifepodcast.com. You can certainly leave a comment on my YouTube channel, Travel Life by a Pilot Wife, and I look forward to seeing you on our next flight. I'm Jackie Elmer. Make it a great day. Do you ever find yourself on the struggle bus with relationships, career, or life in general? I'm a mindset and peak performance coach, helping women rediscover their own sense of identity and purpose, avoid turbulence, and put their own oxygen mask on first. Together, we work to get you out of autopilot and create a better flight plan for life and relationship success. As a pilot wife for over 30 years, I've navigated thousands of miles and moments in aviation, mommyhood, business, and life in general. I would love to offer you a free call
to see if I might be able to help you too. You can go to coach.pilotwifepodcast.com. And if you have a topic suggestion or a story to share on the show, go to ask.pilotwifepodcast.com. And of course, you'll find all of this at resources.pilotwifepodcast.com. Please take a moment to review and rate the show on whatever your favorite podcast app is. This helps the show get found by others who need what we have here. And you might win some fun swag for your troubles. I'll see you on the journey, and thanks for listening.